Okay, so open world gacha games all do the same thing now, and honestly, I don't think anyone even questions it anymore. New update, new region, new aesthetic pulled from somewhere in the real world. Liyue is Chinese inspired. The Xianzhou Luofu leans into that same, well, filtered through a starship. Silver Palace just showed up with a whole Victorian industrial identity. And now, Wuthering Waves is deep into Huanglong, which is very deliberately a Chinese-inspired nation told across 6 different cities. At this point, that's just the genre. Nobody's surprised by it anymore. But here's something I believed for a long time, and I don't think it's actually a controversial take. A region shouldn't just be scenery. If a story is any good, the place it happens in should be shaping it. The conflicts, the characters, even the kind of person who grows up there. That's not some revelation I had, that's just how I think good world building is supposed to work, in any medium. But here's the uncomfortable part. Believing a region should shape a story is easy. Actually watching a game pull that off consistently across multiple regions in both the world and the characters that live in it, that's a completely different, much harder thing to prove. So that's what I want to do today. Not rank these games, not tell you which one wins. I want to actually test the idea, region by region, character by character, and see where it holds up and where it's just a nice looking backdrop wearing the idea of meaning something. Let's start with what a clear yes actually looks like. Before I even get to the comparison, I need a control case, something where I'm confident the aesthetic isn't just decoration, so I actually know what I'm looking for later. And weirdly, the clearest example I've seen recently isn't even one of the games in this comparison, it's Silver Palace. Stay with me for a second. Silver Palace built its entire identity around one specific idea. A Victorian-inspired city, industrial, magic and machinery running side by side, and the protagonist they chose for that world is a detective. That's not a coincidence dressed up as flavor. Think about what a city like that actually produces on its own. Industrialization creates opportunity, opportunity creates inequality, inequality creates ambition, ambition creates corruption. And corruption creates exactly one kind of story extremely well, a mystery. The aesthetic isn't sitting next to the story there, it's underneath it, generating it. You couldn't lift that exact detective plot and drop it into a quiet farming village and have it feel inevitable the same way. The world produces the conflict before a single character even shows up. Now, to be fair, Silver Palace isn't the only place I've seen this done well. Liyue does something similar, if you squint. That whole contracts, tradition and the weight of an old order through line in Genshin's early Liyue arc that's clearly pulled from the aesthetic MiHoYo build. Merchant culture, adepti, mountains that remember things older than the people living on them. When Liyue's story leans into legacy and duty, it's leaning on the exact aesthetic it was built with. So clearly this isn't impossible, it's been done more than once. Which raises the actual question for this video. If the good version of this is achievable, and it demonstrably has been, where does Wuthering Waves actually sit on that scale? Because I'll be honest with you, at launch, I don't think it was close to this. Xianzhou looked great, Lake Fortress, Border Stronghold aesthetic, genuinely striking, but if I'm being fair to myself, not just retroactively flattering the game, in the early hours it mostly felt like a backdrop. Pretty scenery that a lot of different stories could have been dropped into without much changing. But here's the part that actually surprised me while I was putting this video together. That changed a lot, and watching it change is honestly more interesting than if the game had just nailed this from day one. I want to walk through this properly, because I don't think Wuthering Waves arrived at this all at once, I think it grew into it. And I want to actually set that growth next to what Genshin and Star Rail did with their own Chinese-inspired regions. That comparison is where this gets genuinely interesting. Start with Xianzhou. It's described almost word by word in the lore as the throat of Huanglong, the border fortress, the last stronghold against the Tacit Discord threat, and the story there mostly lives inside that idea. Siege mentality, duty, the exhausting weight of being the thing that holds the line so everyone behind you doesn't have to think about it. Good start honestly. Aesthetic and story are at least in conversation with each other. Compare that to Liyue. The aesthetic is doing similar work there, but pointed at something different. Not the border holding back a threat, more like an old wealthy tradition-bound culture reckoning with contracts made a long time ago. Different emotional register, same basic principle. The place is generating the kind of story, not just hosting it. The Xianzhou Luofu, meanwhile, does something I find genuinely clever. It takes that Chinese-inspired aesthetic and puts it on a ship, literally adrift in space, which lines up beautifully with the themes Star Rail keeps returning to. Displacement, inherited tradition carried somewhere it doesn't quite belong anymore, a court trying to preserve its identity while floating through the middle of nowhere. That's a strong pairing of place and theme too. So, 3 different games, 3 genuinely different uses of a similar aesthetic, well, all doing real work. Good, that's not nothing. Now, here's where Wuthering Waves' arc gets interesting to me, because it's not static the way the other 2 examples are. Liyue and Luofu each nailed their thing, and for the most part just held that identity. After Jinzhou came Lahai-Roi and something shifted. The whole region leans into a school coming-of-age atmosphere, and the story follows that completely. Growth, identity, figuring out who you are before the world decides for you. By the epilogue, you're not just watching a plot resolve, you're watching how that specific place shaped the people who grew up in it. And now, we're at Mengzhou, or more precisely, the area we first stepped into isn't Mengzhou proper, it's Xuanfang Hold in the land of Xuanfang, the frontier passage between Jinzhou and Mengzhou. Here's the detail that actually made me sit up while researching this. Xuanfang Hold wasn't built to be pretty. According to the lore, it was established specifically to contain and divide a tacit discord outbreak flowing out of Northfall Barrens. Its entire reason for existing is a containment problem. That's not a set dressing, that's a thesis statement disguised as a map. A city built to hold something back is naturally going to tell stories about things almost getting out, about the cost of holding a line for so long it becomes invisible, about what becomes when containment starts to fail after generations of nothing going wrong. You don't need to invent that conflict from scratch, the region hands it to you before the first quest even starts. And then there's the wider aesthetic of Mengzhou itself. Waterways, gardens, pavilions, all that classical elegance, laced through with hidden machinery and automata. Nature and mechanism sitting right next to each other, neither one fully in control of the other. Which, if you sit with it for a second, is basically the emotional question the whole region seems built around. What happens when something built to protect you starts operating on its own terms? So compare that to Liyue and Luofu, which each committed to one strong identity and mostly just stayed there. Wuthering Waves looks different, less like it arrived with a fully formed philosophy, more like a studio that's been visibly leveling up at this specific skill, region after region. I don't think that makes it better, I think it makes the trend line more interesting to watch, because you can actually see the improvement happening in real time, which is rare. World and environment. I think the answer is genuinely yes here, increasingly so, with real receipts. Now, for the harder test, because a region is one thing, a person is a completely different problem. Here's where I have to be careful, because there's an obvious answer here that isn't actually interesting, and I don't want to waste your time pretending it is. Of course, a character's look reflects their region. Every game in this conversation clears that bar easily. Shen Yun's entire design pulls from Liyue's immortal cloud and crane mythology. The silhouette, the motifs, even her color palette, all of it points straight back to a Deptai iconography. Jingyuan carries that Xianzhou court elegance in everything. His robes, his cadence, that slow unbothered authority that reads as someone who's had centuries to get comfortable being in charge. Both are genuinely well designed. If I sat here and told you Wu is somehow uniquely good at making characters look like they belong to their region, that would just be false, and you'd be right to call me out on it. So that's not the real question. The real question is whether the region reaches past the look, whether it actually gets into the character, their behavior, their powers, their arc, not just what they wear, what they're capable of, and why. It's a much rarer thing to pull off too, a lot easier to reskin a kit than to justify one. Which brings me to Yang and Sui Sui. Full transparency, I'm writing this before 3.5 has actually launched, so I want to be careful about what I'm asserting versus what's just been teased. But from what Kuro's shown so far, Huanglong is getting an evolved form, Huanglong, tied directly to the Mengzhou arc, and is being framed as something closer to an awakening than a costume change. Suisui, meanwhile, is being tied into the capital, Mingting, which, if that connection plays out the way it's being set up, means we could be watching two characters get shaped by two different pieces of the same nation simultaneously. If that holds up the way it's being teased, and we'll know for sure by the time this video is actually live, that's the rare thing I mentioned a second ago. Not her scarf now has a Mengzhou pattern stitched into it, her becoming something, mechanically, narratively, because of where the story has taken her. Compare that to Xianyuan and Jingyuan, and I want to correct myself a little here, because it'd be unfair to say the region only touches their aesthetic. It doesn't. Jingyuan Entire's rule exists because of the Xianzhou's sword-blooded curse. Generals eventually succumb to it, and their own disciples have to end them and take their place. That's not flavor, that's the region's history directly producing his arc, his authority, even the quiet weight he carries. Shenyun's the same. She's not just dressed like an adeptus. She exists because Liyue's whole system of adepti guarding the land created a role for a being like her in the first place. So the region clearly shaped both of them. But here's the distinction I think actually matters. It shaped them before the story started. It's a backstory, something you learn about, already finished, already settled into who they are by the time you meet them. What might be different with Huanglong is timing. If her arc plays out the way it's being teased, she isn't revealing an identity the region already gave her. She's becoming something because of what's happening in the story right now, live, in front of us. Not here's a being this culture already produced, more like here's someone this place is actively still shaping mid-story. I'll be honest, that's a smaller distinction than I made it sound a minute ago. It's not aesthetic versus real shaping, both are real. It's closer to finished shaping versus shaping in progress. But it's still a distinction worth noticing. That's not a knock on either of them. Building a character whose defining shaping already happened before the story starts is a completely legitimate way to do this. It's what most games lean on. What's rarer is stretching that shaping into something still happening on screen in real time while you're watching. But it's the specific thing I keep noticing Wuthering Waves reaching for. Not just region-appropriate silhouettes and color palettes, actual vocabulary shifts, behavior shifts, the specific kind of person each region tends to produce. Lahai-Roi's cast already carried themselves differently than Jinzou's did, and it's not because someone told an artist to make it look more Chinese, it's because the writer seems to keep asking what kind of person actually grows out of a specific place under specific pressures, and then building the kit and the arc around that answer instead of just the silhouette. That's the harder test, and I think it's one Wuthering Waves is still actively working through. Not perfectly, not with every character, but noticeably more than it used to, and more directly than the other two games I've mentioned tend to attempt. So, back to the actual question I opened with. Does aesthetic matter for storytelling in a gacha game, or is it just skin no matter how nice the skin looks? Honestly, I think the answer is it matters exactly as much as the studio is willing to let it. Silver Palace showed us what it looks like when a world has no choice but to grow its story out of what it is. Liyue and Xianzhou Luofu each proved you can build a single strong identity and hold it, and what I've watched happen with Wuthering Waves is a game slowly, visibly learning to do the same thing, not from day one, but climbing toward it with every region. Jinzhou was the first real attempt. Lahai-Roi got the region to story connection right. And now, with Suanfang Hold and Mengzhou, we're watching a studio try to push that same idea all the way down into character design itself. Not just how someone looks, what they actually become because of where they're from. I don't think that job is finished. I don't think it's ever really finished for a live service game. But the trend line is real, and I think it's worth paying attention to as 3.5 actually lands. So I'll turn this one back to you. When a region's aesthetic shapes a character this directly, not just their look, but who they become, does that make the story hit harder for you? Or does it not really matter as long as the moment-to-moment writing is good, regardless of the backdrop? Anyway, that's gonna be all from me for this one. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe if you want to see more story discussions like this one. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.